Good. Recording in progress. Welcome everybody to our last lecture. Not really a full-blown lecture. We're just going to kind of go over a couple of things that we didn't get to that are not required, but are good to know, good to be able to use. One of them is displacement maps. We already went over using the remap HSV to kind of knock color saturation down on a file node. Other than that, if there are any demos that you want to see, it's a good chance to get a last minute critique, talk over any issues you're having with us. When you have lab this afternoon, make sure you get at least some feedback before leaving. And it's, don't forget your assignment's going to be due tomorrow night. So with that said, let's get this here. So yes, project 7 and the discussion will be due tomorrow night before midnight. I will have office hours tomorrow on Discord from 10 to 4. Take a break for lunch in there somewhere. Frank will be doing the online open lab. It's online virtual for all students. Campus, online, doesn't matter. We can help you a lot in Discord. Sometimes the screen share is a little wonky. It's okay. But if we've got more than one person, Zoom is really the only way to do it. So that will be 1 to 5 p.m. All right, so let's just go around real quick, see if anybody has any questions, any issues. So Cantavius, questions? Anything you want to go over? Okay, Cantavius is good. Joni, any questions? Anything you want to go over? Brianna's good. Thank you, Brianna. Joni's good. Darian, questions? Anything else you want to go over? So far, so good. All right. Frenzy, anything you want to go over before we get started? Anything not clear? All right, if you have any questions, let me know. So we're going to do displacement maps. We'll review any material if there is any demos as needed. Don't have to worry about attendance check. I have the Zoom files. I took attendance when we had campus classes because I got to know everybody there. And that is not an issue right now, although in the future, attendance is going to be monitored a lot more closely when we start getting back to campus more. And we're going to start requiring people to either attend on campus or online, live. All right. Like I said, good time for last minute project 7 critiques. All right. So displacement maps allow us to change the geometry of a surface at render time. Kind of similar to the way that opacity maps work. Opacity maps, we can remove portions of geometry at render time. For this, we're actually changing the surface itself to get genuine surface relief as opposed to just a fake, like with a bump map. So most displacement works the same way in pretty much any package. You've done it with the old Mental Ray, done it with RenderMan, done it with Arnold, done it with V-Ray. Okay, all of them start by plugging the displacement file or starting the creation of it in what's called the shading group. Now, if you remember me talking about the shading group, every time I get a chance, I rant about it. So the shading group, SG for short, okay, that sends the renderer information at render time. So what does that mean? Well, when you hit the render button, the renderer goes into, well, basically for our purposes, the hypershade and queries all of the shading groups. What are you assigned to? Do you have anything plugged into you? How many lights are assigned to you? How many surfaces have your material description, utilities, placement nodes, anything that the renderer needs to know in order to do the job. Now, normally, until today, we've been using just like bump maps where, the renderer gets the information from the shading group because it doesn't really alter the geometry in any way. We also, when we rendered out the wine label, that information was sent by the, material to the renderer about having an opacity map, which is all fine and well. Not many things change there. It's either, visible white or invisible or removed black. But with a displacement, we are actually changing the tessellation of the geometry. So tessellation is how is our normal poly surface, which is usually quads, triangulated. And when you have edges and curves, you get a little more triangulation, a little more density in the mesh around the edges to make them smooth, depending on what you've done. You've hit the smooth key, you've hit the 3 key. And its job, tessellation, its job is basically to make it look good, to make it look like you see it in the viewport, at least that good. Now, when we use a bump map, that surface relief, that illusion of height on the surface is purely cosmetic, right? It's an illusion. It's based on the surface normals and how they, their relationship to the camera. So any surface normals that are facing the camera, we see that bump effect a lot more than when they start to face away. And when they get to 90 degrees, that bump effect is gone. With displacement, we are actually changing the surface height at render time. So we start by plugging in our file into what's called the displacement mat, short for material. Okay, and it's in the shading group. So the material gets plugged into the shading group, into surface shader, and the displacement gets plugged in. Now, the only other thing, there's a volume shader, which we don't get into. When you use a file node, very similar to a bump map, we get this displacement node. Right? And our file's plugged into the displacement. This gives us control over how much displacement we see, the amount, the intensity of it. And it's also got an area for our map to get plugged in. We use simple black and white files, just like we do for a bump. And, normally our surface is nice and smooth like that. And wherever we have white, we see our surface go up. Wherever we have black, we see our surface go down. So that actually happens at render time. We actually see this surface relief. We see height, we see indentation. Unlike with a bump, it's all sort of false shadows and illusion. We actually see a profile change. Now, a couple of odd things about Arnold. In order for us to be able to control the displacement a little bit better, and here's kind of a close-up shot of the displacement node, right? Displacement, this is where our file gets plugged into. We use scale to adjust the height of it. If you're doing something like a ZBrush file where you've got a vector displacement, that would get plugged in here because it's got three, it's got three inputs, X, Y, and Z, basically. But we also have to go into the surface, the actual geometry shape node, in order to be able to add a few more subdivisions in to get Arnold to make it look good. And basically, we're going to change the type of displacement from none to this thing called Cat Clark, which is Ed Catmull, and I can't remember the other computer scientist's name. Ed Catmull, if you're not familiar with him, he's the guy who wrote RenderMan. He's got a lot of patents as far as rendering. Well, I wouldn't want to say technology. It's mostly software. He wrote a lot of the code for the modern render effects and techniques that we use today. So Cat Clark gives a nice kind of ability for the displacement to look good without excessive mesh density. And iterations, depending on detail you want, you can go 2, 4, 8. Just remember, iterations, it's kind of like adding more subdivisions in. It takes much longer to render. So let's take a look at what this looks like. So I'm going to fire up Maya, and I'm going to use the, let's use the demo 6 files that we used. We used a couple of times. We used it for lecture 8 when we did the ground. We wanted to see our brick, so we put it on the ground there. We put the bump on, and then we put the base color. Just waiting for my stuff to start up. There we go. Okay, so I can move all this out of the way. All right, so let's start that. Let's go back up here, and let's do this. So let's just open this scene up, see what we get. Error, don't worry about it. All right, so yeah, this is our bump map and our base color. So let's do a quick render of that. We can use that kind of as our guide. All right, so we can see, it's not bad. This is a bump map with our texture on it that we made repeatable in lecture 8. So let me stop that. We'll keep this. And I'm going to assign a brand new material to the ground, so we can start basically from scratch. Okay. So this is our bump and color. And let's just revisit the bump. So to put a bump on here without the color, we basically select our surface, we go down under geometry, and there's bump mapping. So we click the input button. I want a 2D file. That's automatically going to create a bump utility for me. And inside the bump value, that's where our file gets plugged. Value, think value, black and white, dark and light. That's what the file does. It provides that dark value, light value for surface relief or the illusion of surface relief. So there's my file. Let's plug in the bump. I can see it a little bit in the viewport. There we go. So as always with a bump, everything is way too intense. Let's knock it down to like 0.1, maybe even 0.05. And you can see at 1, it's not that intense, but it does look darker because it is trying to fake height using shadow. So I'm just going to leave it at the default scale here, just so we can see. All right, so that's my bump of 1. Let's knock it down to 0.1 and just compare real quick. So you can see it's a little bit lighter, and the reason it's a little bit lighter is we are faking less height. Now, I've got reflectivity on there. Usually on brick, it's not going to be that reflective. So let's kill that. There we go. Looked wet before, now it doesn't. All right, so I could take this down even more so it looks a little more realistic. Let's go down. Let's do the input there. All right, so 0.03. So you can see it gets lighter and lighter and lighter because it's trying to fake less height. All right, so that is my bump surface. Just going to label that bump. Let's create a new one, another new Arnold standard surface. And this one's going to be displace. All right, so standard, turn off reflectivity. Let's drop the value down to 0.18. So it looks a little better. There we go. So flat. Good. All right. Render settings. Yep, everything is good. Let's do hypershade. All right, so the hypershade, I've got bump. There's my network right here. And let's do my displace network. Right now, I don't have anything plugged in, but we're going to utilize the shading group. So when I select the shading group and go into my attribute editor, you'll notice it's still giving me the material, but to the left, there is a shading group. So this is what we need to work with. Shading group 10. Yep. AI standard surface 10 SG. So you can see our material gets plugged into the surface material, and displacement, this is where we map in our file node. We go 2D file, and it automatically creates a displacement utility here for us. Very similar to what happens when we add a bump in. Now, this displacement is a little bit different. So this displacement is going to utilize the file. And instead of value, it gets plugged into displacement. It's just reading that file, black and white information, value only. You can see it's using the alpha. And it will channel all the lightness and darkness into the alpha for us. So there's my file node, and this is where I'm going to plug in my bump map, just like I did for the bump utility. And let's render it out. It disappeared. So a couple of reasons it disappeared. One is we've got way too much displacement. And two is we don't have all that much density in the mesh. But it's very kind of weird to see the whole ground plane disappear. So let's go back, retrace our steps. There's our displace. Just like with a bump map, we use not bump depth or displacement depth, we use scale. And right now, scale, it's reading that black and white brick file and putting it in as is. Usually scale, start at like 0.1, just like we do with a bump map. So now I click on it and it sort of looks like it's, it's going to work. It's getting real weird. I'm seeing pieces of it fall apart and come in. So you say, okay, well, maybe it's too high. It's just breaking apart. Well, the real reason we're not really seeing anything is that we need to adjust the geometry. And this is where we select the surface and we go into what's called the shape node. Shape node contains a bunch of information, contains mesh information, tessellation information, render stats. Down under Arnold, we want to scroll down to subdivisions. And right now, the type of subdivisions, when it's trying to retessellate this surface, it basically has none. So you have a bunch of, well, not a bunch. You got none, you got linear, you got Cat Clark. So I'm going to turn Cat Clark on, just leave it at everything at the default, hit render. You can see it's kind of wonky and wobbly now. So let me put that back to none. Let's save that. Let's change it back to Cat Clark. So now you can see it's trying to displace it, but it's really wonky. And basically that's because there's not enough iterations. It's not got enough information. So let's change it from 1 to 2. Now you can see it's starting to try to grab that brick texture, and it looks a little better than 1. Let me put that back to 1. 1 is kind of wonky. 2, a little bit better. Let's save that. Let's try, well, we can try 3. You can see it's a little better. Let's try 4. We're getting more detail. Now you can start to see it's forming into rectangles instead of these kind of wobbly, soft looking. They look like bakery buns, honestly. So now we've got some really like gnarly looking mesh. Let's try going back into the displacement. Let's turn down the scale a little bit more. Let's turn the scale down. Let's try 0.05. So it's not quite so much. All right, now, to be honest, I want more resolution or a better look than that. So I'm going to crank my iterations up. Again, select the geometry, go to the shape node. Let's take that up to 8. Let me stop this. Let me save this. And let's render this again. Now, when I render, it's going to take a little bit longer to kind of start displaying it because we are adding a lot more basically mesh density at render time to it. So you can see we've got a lot of little peaks and valleys here. It's taking all, it's drilling down into the fine detail of that map and trying to display more accurately with height what's going on. You can definitely see the low-lying area where the grout is and that brick area, but it looked like little mountain ranges in there. So I'm going to leave the iterations at 8, and you might say, well, that's excessive, but I want the resolution, but I also want to lower the amount of displacement. So let's save that one. I'm going to cut it down. Let's go 0.02 and re-render. So again, it's going to take a little bit. So we lowered it a little. It's starting to look a little more like brick. So maybe I'll go 0.01. Let's try that. Give it a few seconds to render out. All right, maybe 0.015. I don't know, maybe that's too much. But you can see, let's go down here and see if we can zoom in. Let's go down to the end here where our file is. And you can see that is actual displacement. We have changed at render time. So it looks a lot better the further away we are from it. Let's see, is that where we've been rendering from? No, we'll back a little further, zoom out. All right, so there's our brick. Looks like we need to repeat this a little bit more. So we can still repeat it in our place 2D. Right now it's set to repeat to 1. Let's repeat it to, let's go to 2. All right, so the shadow we're getting, that's actual shadow. You can see it's the geometry, is breaking up that shadow from the sphere and also from the helix. You can see the indentations, those are genuine. All right, now we can continue to drape a, a texture map on top of this. You could also use it as a painted surface. So for example, in our HDR that we have here, you can see that's painted brick at Full Sail Zen Garden back there. So in theory, you could do that if you wanted to. Probably want to take it into Substance Painter and kind of paint in those areas where it's going to be a little lighter, where there's sand in between the bricks a little bit. These bricks have been painted. So, originally there's concrete in between there, but when you paint on it, you get dirt, you get sand, you get dust. It's going to fill in those little crevices. So that would be a perfect time to use Substance Painter for that. Or you could just go ahead and drape the texture into the base color, diffuse map that we made. Go into here. So there's our base color. All right. So you can see that my base map does not line up with my displacement. And that is because we are using two different place 2D files, right? This is the one we've got repeating, and we want this to also drive the diffuse or base color. So if you remember from lecture 8, we can have one place 2D drive two file nodes. We just need to use the middle mouse and the command modifier key to tell this place 2D to also control file 7, which is our texture. So to do that, remember this level of detail icon. That's where we're going to middle mouse from. And we're going to drop it on top of this little icon, little picture of the brick in file 7. So hold command, middle mouse, click on top of this level of detail Burger King icon, drag it over, release your middle mouse once you're on top of the picture, release the modifier key, and now your place 2D is driving not only the displacement, but also, and it did it already for us. Now, with that map on, it looks like, I got a lot of displacement there. I'm starting to see a little bit of that grout pull up onto the top of onto the bricks. Well, let's just pull that off to the side a little. So it's actually a lot higher than it looks. Now, once you have, replaced the old place 2D that was attached to your base color, it's free floating, that can be deleted. So now I make one change. If I change the number of repeats, it will change it for the displacement and also the diffuse, which is your base color. Now, if I want to lower the depth or amount of displacement, I can simply go back into the displacement, which is right here, and I can lower it even more. So, well, let's go 0.005. See what we get here. So you can see that height definitely went down. So too much? Well, I mean, we could bump it up a little bit. So I just bumped it up to 0.006 instead of 0.005. Now, it's going to be based on your reference. All right. Anybody have any questions so far? Like I said, this is not mandatory to use, but you can use it for the exterior. You could also use it for the interior. If you wanted to use brick wall for the accent where the windows are in the interior, that's a separate wall, piece of wall geometry. Might need to alter the UVs a little. I would throw a checker on it just to make sure they're all nice and even. And then you should be able to get a decent result. All right, I'm kind of liking that 0.005, so I'm going to stick with that for now. But here are all of our iterations. We started with a bump map, right? Plain bump there, kind of lowered the bump a little bit. This is our first, when we first placed our displacement on there. Basically, the geometry disappeared because there was a lot of displacement and there were no iterations in the subdivisions when it went to try and render it. Now, perhaps if the mesh were, 10 times denser, I wouldn't have to worry about that. But now we started adjusting the depth of it or the scale of the displacement. And then we started going into the shape node and we changed it from none to Cat Clark. And then we started adding iterations. So we got more resolution, more detail. Then we started adjusting the displacement scale to get it closer to what we want, drape the texture on until we got the right height. So now with this, I would say, yeah, that's pretty good. But to me, that brick is really kind of saturated, which again happens when you've got compressed files that you get off the internet. The colors, due to the file compression, tend to oversaturate a little bit. So this might be a really good time to add in that remap HSV that we talked about the other day, basically on Monday. So the color is what's oversaturated. That orange, yellowish, reddish color. So that we're going to need to use that remap HSV between file 7, which is our base color, and the material. Now, does anybody remember how do we create a remap HSV or any utility? Anybody? Now, let's take a look. Happen to have a keynote for that. So our remap HSV, again, allows us to, HSV stands for hue, saturation, and value. without going into Photoshop, we need to create that in the Utilities section. So in the Hypershade, under Create, on the left side, we go down to Utilities under Maya. Everything is alphabetical. So we scroll down to the R's. And you got Remap Color, HSV Value. Don't do color, don't do value. We want hue, saturation, and value. Saturation is really what we're after. Now, wouldn't it be cool if you could just put this in between? It would hook itself up. But it's really not that difficult. There's an input on the left, output on the right. You take the file node, the out color, click on that little green ball. That gives you another connection noodle. Plug it into the input of the remap. Take the out color of the remap, plug that into the base color. And now you've just rerouted your file through this so you can adjust the hue, the saturation, and the value if you want, which we really do want. So what I'm going to do is take my upper right point on that line graph there and just lower it a little bit. You can see the more I lower it, the lighter it gets. Now, as I lower it, that's really bright. I might also want to think about knocking down the diffuse gain, but let's knock down the value first, or sorry, the saturation. So like 0.9, let's compare that. Yeah, that's not bad. Maybe 0.95. I don't want to take all the edge off of it. There we go. That looks a little more worn. Now, at this point also, it looks like it's responding to a lot of light. So don't forget that we can go in with our material and adjust the base weight. So I like to be really conservative when I adjust the base weight. Just knock it down a little bit. Just so it doesn't look completely blown out. Well, let's try 8.5. Now, let's put it back to 1. I want to have a point of comparison. So it's always good before you start playing around, just save a quick IPR render version of it. There we go. Now let's drop the weight down. So you can see it's going to reflect, it's going to change a few things like how much it reflects. So I'm not a huge fan in lowering the weight too much, because if you lower the weight enough, it looks like it belongs in an overcast scene, overcast day. That's not the case. So let's take it back up to 8. And again, this is going to be based off your reference. Ideally, I would want to have, patio brick as my reference so I can see what's going on. Reference makes it so much easier to work. Now we compare that with our bump map, and the bump map looks good, but you can definitely tell it's a fake. It's very flat, as opposed to actually being able to see geometry raised up a little bit. We've actually got some genuine shadow there. Right. Any questions about displacement? Now, we generally keep displacement maps for large surface changes. Small details, like maybe a bump map on the bread or the table where you got kind of a, kind of a noisy pitted look on your table because it's been out in the weather, it's been worn, it's developed little holes. Any kind of fine detail, you definitely want to bump. Now, on top of this, I could throw a bump map also and maybe pick up a little bit more of that grout between the bricks. Now, it's still a little bleached in the bricks there. So I don't know, maybe. Doesn't help that I keep changing the camera angle, but you can still see what's going on. All right, so Frenzy doesn't have any questions. Brianna doesn't. Marie, Kentavious, Joni, Darian, questions. Chanel, any questions? Joni's good. Chanel, no questions. Kentavious is good. Okay. All right. Anybody need to see any demos? Any questions about anything? Any issues you guys are having working? Joni's having issues. Okay, Joni, what do you have? If you want to, you can hit the space bar. That'll unmute you and you can talk.
Hello?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so a few lectures ago when we did like the desk and the mug and the laptop all in substance, um
That wasn't me. That was Tony
uh,
Bagsby.
yeah, so when I did all that stuff, it was all good. So then I opened up my file again, and the textures weren't there. So I had to go in again into the hypershade and re-put the textures in, and
Where are
that
you putting your textures?
it's in the same folder I set it in my projects, my project itself.
Okay, you know what? Why don't you share? Let me stop sharing my screen and share yours.
I'm gonna have to switch Zoom then, if that's okay.
You're gonna have to switch.
Yeah, to my PC then.
Okay,
Just give me 1 second then. I have to reconnect.
okay, no problem. All right, while we're waiting for Joni, anybody else have any questions? Anybody else having issues? All right, we'll wait for Joni for a second. And let's see, what do we got going on here? All right, so we're still recording. We're waiting for Joni to come back. Let me pause the recording. All right, I'm resuming the recording. You like my background, Chanel? You know who that is back there?
Hello?
Hello, Joni.
Is my mic working?
Yep, it seems to be okay. Got a little bit of hiss in it, but you might need to
Um,
speak up a little. It's kind of low.
Okay, do you want me to share my screen?
Yep, share your screen.
Okay, so this is the scene itself.
All right.
So the cup, the mug, these all have the same textures, and these are the only ones that won't import back. Like this was in Substance Painter, and it was along with the laptop and the mug, but they won't stay on. Okay.
You
And
zoomed
like
in too far. All right, so
all
can
this
you
is
show me your
text.
actual desktop? Because right now you're sharing. There we go. Okay. So show me, where is your project folder?
This is it. That was also a problem. The reason I have these in there is because my last project said that it wasn't in here, the HDR. It didn't save into the file, and I had to figure out how to put it back in, and it wouldn't like stay in the file unless I had it somewhere.
All right. For one thing, that's not a project folder structure. The project folder structure is just like the ones we give you, where it's got like about 10 different folders in it. It's got source images, it's got scenes, it's got render data, it's got images.
Images is
You're,
here.
yeah, but
This
you've created a temporary
these two I
project folder
these
structure.
two I didn't create, and this I didn't create.
Right.
The reference text I did.
That's because when you set your project, Maya creates that workspace folder. And in order for it to function, it needs to have an images folder and a scenes folder usually. So my question is, what are you setting your project to when you go to work?
The folder.
Okay, but that's not a file project structure. You don't have any of your source images in there. All right, so where is your Maya folder, your Maya project file?
Like right here.
Okay, so the first thing we want to do is, I hate to say this, but you're going to have to move all that stuff into an actual project folder.
Okay.
Where, before you move anything though, where is your substance? Where are all your substance files?
In the references, and then in this folder here, where all these
Ah,
where I had to go
okay.
in and do it manually in the
Yeah,
spreadsheet.
and what's happening is, since you're not using an actual project file structure, every time you set your project, because Maya's looking for a source images folder, you don't have a source images folder. So every time you're going to have to go set it to that reference folder. So when was the last time you used a project folder, a structure?
I don't know.
All right, because that's, the reason at the beginning of our instructions, we say, make a copy of your Maya project folder. And that project folder contains all the subfolders you need. Do you have a project 6 folder?
I had to restart, so my project 6 is mostly incomplete.
Okay, how about
So I
project
had to
5?
a zipped project 5, because
Well,
this
we don't really want a zipped folder.
then this is the submission that I
That's what you submit to us, but you're not
yeah.
submitting a project folder to us. You are submitting a basically a deliverable folder. All right, go to project. Do you have project 5 there?
This is the project 5 that I opened.
Do you remember the original download that you got? It had a Maya project folder, it had a Photoshop template folder, and it also had a reference folder.
Yes.
It should be a file structure like that.
I don't know.
Okay. So
Let me check.
that's going to, you're always going to have this issue unless you actually work with a Maya project folder. All right, so here's what I want you to do. You can close that. We're going to create a brand new Maya project folder, and we're going to put it inside your project 7 folder that you've got there. Okay.
Okay.
So go to Maya, go to File, go down to Project Window, and we are going to create New in the upper right corner. And the location, put it inside your Project 7 folder. All right, so is that the right location?
Yeah.
Okay, so now rename that from new project to Maya project 7.
Oh.
Okay, now down at the bottom, click accept. So now go back to the folder you have. So there's your Maya project folder. Okay, open that up. That's all those subfolders are what you need. All right, can you open up a new window alongside of that window? All right, so what I want you to do is, stay inside the folder on the left, open up source images on the left side. And you want to put in your HDR images. You also want to put in, take your, go up a level on the left side. And you want to put your Maya scene file into scenes. Go back a level. Go back to source images, and you said you got a bunch of your texture stuff that's in reference, right?
Yeah, this entire folder.
Take your texture files out of there and put them into source images.
So all of this.
Are you using all those?
Yeah, because every single one I
Okay,
made
yeah, select them all then. All right, so close the folder or close the window on the right. Have you saved your scene?
I'll just save it again.
Well, the reason I'm asking, it's not going to save because we moved its location.
I'm pretty sure it's saved. When I reopened it again, that's the problem.
Okay, so let's set project. No, that's not project folder. It's the project folder we just made. Now, go File, Open. Open your scene up. Don't save. Now, what you're going to have to do is you're probably going to have to relink your stuff up. So select your dome light, the visible dome light first. The one with the HDR. Go to color. You want to
Oh,
you want to go to the where you have it mapped in. And just reload it. It should have taken you to the right location. You shouldn't have to go outside.
so
Source images, everything should be in source images. All right, good. Now, go and which one was not staying for you?
well, these were the ones, but it looks like they're back. The cup and the laptop.
All right, well, try doing a quick render that's really low resolution just to make sure stuff is going to work. Does it look like it's there?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's part of the problem. Always set your project to that Maya project folder structure. Whenever you work on anything, that's what needs to be there. All right, can you stop the render and go to the long shot? Wait, that's a
Oh,
desk.
that was the.
Yeah, you want the long shot, but you also need to
There
change
you
a
go.
bookmark. There we go.
There.
All right, so just looking to make sure you got your image outside the window, everything else is there. So does it all look like it should?
I think so.
All right, so that's your problem. Make sure you use that Maya project folder. Because when you start adding external files back into Maya, Maya needs to know the location. And if anything changes, it's going to break and not be able to display them.
Uh, so how do I submit the file? Because
Okay,
it's
so
gonna be
can you bring up the FSO? So what do the instructions say?
um. Well, the actual deliverable. It's like
Yeah, there you
like
go. You've got a Maya project folder, a template, and a folder with your reference images. We don't care about your source images. If we need your Maya project folder, we will request that. But the reason we don't have you submit a whole Maya project folder is because they can be really big.
so. I would just make a copy and take out the other folders, or
No,
I'm confused.
you would. Well, how have you been delivering all your other stuff?
I've been copying the file and then taking
Right.
out the
Okay.
stuff.
Well, you need to, for one thing, you need to make a folder first, right? And you would copy your Maya scene file and your template into that folder. And then you would put a copy of your reference folder in there. Your reference images are what's in the template. They are not textures.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you're not delivering the Maya project folder to us unless we get your scene and we have to be able to open the actual scene up and render it. in that case, we will ask you for your Maya project folder. But most of the time, we can just open your scene file and look and see, pretty much read what the issue is without having to render it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, any other questions?
No.
Okay, you're off the hook for sharing now. All right, good, good. All right, anybody else have any questions? Nathaniel, you just joined us. You got any questions? Frenzy's good. Marie, any questions? Kentavious? Nathaniel's good, no questions. Brianna's good, thank you. Chanel, good, are you good? Marie's good, thank you, Marie. Kentavious is good. Darian, any questions? Joni, you're good. Any more questions? Let us know. All right. One other quick thing to go over. So we've gone through quite a few maps. We got spec maps, roughness maps, bump maps. We just got done doing displacement maps, opacity maps, alpha or transparency maps. They all have a couple of elements, actually 2 elements in common. Anybody know what they are? All right, so I shared my screen again. So spec maps, roughness maps, bump maps, Darian said they're black and white. He said maybe. Anybody want to confirm or dispute that? Anybody gonna let him off the hook? Well, you're right, Darian. Black and white maps. Spec maps, black is basically off, white is on, gray somewhere in between. Spec maps, you remember, get plugged into specular weight. Roughness maps, depends on, what roughness you're doing. Most of the time, it's going to be specular roughness. When you're dealing with glass, it's going to be specular roughness and that transmission extra roughness. Bump maps, that's down under geometry. That's black and white. Black is lowered, white is raised. Oh, back off to roughness maps. Black is no roughness. White is total roughness. Gray somewhere in between. Displacement maps use the same information as bump maps, our simple black and white maps. Opacity maps, same thing. Black is transparent, white is opaque. Same thing with an alpha channel. So with black and white maps, you can create a lot of control in your materials. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a short break, 20-minute break. That will allow me to render out the first part of lecture. When we come back, we're going to use this as a work time. And if you guys want a critique, here is the process for a critique. Now, if you are not in lab or lecture and you want to critique, make it a PNG file, upload it to the critiques channel in Discord. Do a self-evaluation, tell us what you see, tag us at instructors so we know it's there. When we get a chance, we'll go over, we'll give you a review, we'll give you some feedback, read the comments, apply the changes, that we've recommended, the things that we've seen. And if you want another follow-up, make sure that you post it and address in your comment all the things that you fixed, so we know where we're starting from. Because you may not, I mean, you may post it, I may get to critique it. You may post it again, I may not be there, Frank might be there, or Anthony Bagsby, or Ari might be there. So, just include the things that you've changed with it. Now, if you're in lecture or lab, take your PNG and upload it here to the chat. This way we can go over it with you, and it'll make it a lot easier. All right. Any questions before we take a short break? That's going to be for me to basically upload the first part of lecture. There actually is only one part of lecture. When we come back, work time. And if you're having issues doing something, perfect time for us to give you help. All right, so let's do one more quick round. Brianna, Chanel, Darian, Frenzy, Joni, Kentavious, Marie, Nathaniel. Questions before we take a short break? Nathaniel's good. Brianna's good. Thank you. Kentavious is good. Marie's good. Chanel's good. Darian's good. Joni, any more questions? Joni's good. Thank you. All right. So I'm going to stop recording.